professor, physician, epidemiologist. I am Dr. Sri Banerjee. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Sri Banerjee, core faculty for the College of Health Sciences and Public Policy at Walden University. And in this video, what I'm going to be going over is talking to you a little bit about Indigenous people and what their harsh realities are globally. Oftentimes, when I'm talking about Indigenous people and Indigenous culture, and I'll be honest with you, the most exposure that I've had in interacting with people of Indigenous origin are Native Americans of the United States heritage. I've interacted in different reservations, the Lakota tribe, and the Cherokee tribe, and also have had previous students and graduates that have actually Indigenous heritage. I also have interacted with Indigenous individuals of other countries as well. Anyway, going into talking about how many Indigenous people there are. There's 476 million people Indigenous in 90 countries. And they belong to 5,000 different Indigenous peoples and speak more than 4,000 different languages. And I'm reading off of Amnesty International. I actually personally worked with Amnesty International around 2003, visited their office, one of their headquarters in Atlanta, and worked closely with their with some of their employees. Anyway, so I actually personally trust this organization for many reasons. So looking at a third of the world's 900 million extremely poor rural peoples. Well, they're indigenous, so basically 300 million people out of the 900 million are indigenous and poor. So what do they face? We can look in the past for the history of the United States and see the types of discrimination and just forced displacement, Trail of Tears you might have heard of, that took place by Andrew Jackson and other presidents. But you know, we can see these similar patterns. I mean, that was in the 1800s, but we see similar patterns still persist all over the world. Discrimination against Indigenous people, which is why their voices need to be heard. They're often marginalized, discriminated against, and the idea is that they face intimidation, violence, maybe physically attacked and even killed. There's actually a whole over a span of about 10 to 15 years, Indigenous disappearances, especially in Canada, people of First Nations. So this is something that requires a lot more attention. Now, oftentimes when we're talking about Indigenous people, there's confusion as to how to identify. So most importantly, they need to self-identify as such. There's a historical link with those who inhabited a country or region at the time when people of different cultures or ethnic origins arrived. A lot of times there's a strong link to territories and surrounding natural resources. And I think this, out of all of the different characteristics, I think this sets indigenous populations apart from other populations, and which is why I actually am a big proponent of environmental health, promoting environmental health within the parameters of public health. And so I consider this actually an extension of public health and understanding overall health. So if we're disturbing natural habitats, and if we're trying to curb climate change or even global warming, then we're actually helping save people that are of indigenous origin. And I already told you that about 300 million people are poor. And so we're actually protecting, by protecting the environment, we're protecting people that are, uh, for instance, still participate or partake in subsistence farming. Um, they have a distinct social, economic, or political systems. And so some of my experiences of indigenous populations in other countries where there's still a large percentage. Languages are spoken, distinct languages are spoken, even in very close proximity. So you might have 10 miles between two villages, and there might be different languages spoken due to the fact that there's an indigenous sort of origin. They have distinct social, economic, or political systems. So, village elders and understanding traditional knowledge, respecting traditional knowledge, and being able to oftentimes syncretize and bring in traditional knowledge, and then understand how to interact with the people um, by providing the types of support and resources that they may need. So a lot of times, what is happening is many of these people's homes are getting displaced, and they're being forcibly removed. For instance, I can give you instances with the dam in India, where it was controversial because um, changing the course of a river would completely flood a whole community. And so what happened was the people that were downstream from this were vehemently opposed, and but the government actually did not take the action on the side of the indigenous people, and the people had to be displaced. So, understanding these connections and being sensitive of these is important to then being and then creating communities which will provide a comfortable place for people to live. They have distinct social, economic, or political systems. They have a distinct language, culture, and beliefs. They're marginalized and discriminated against by the state, and this is often the case. They maintain and develop their ancestral environments and systems as distinct peoples. Um, and there's a strong sense of tradition and a reliance on traditional beliefs and customs, and oftentimes, and I've studied the cultures in many different environments, and oftentimes there's difficulty in trying to integrate other systems of thinking. So it's a lot of times ethnographies are needed to understand the culture first and understand the needs and the gaps and involve the people in order to provide health services or provide change. So indigenous peoples are also known as First Peoples, Aboriginal peoples, or native peoples. Adivasis in India, actually the Santhal people, also uh, Janajatis in Nepal. So in 2007, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights were passed, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And of course, this is good to go over. Economic, the permanent forum on indigenous issues. That is the central body within the United Nations, which deals with indigenous related issues. So, economic, social development, cultural, environment, education, health, human rights. And there continues to be clashes and resentment among people of indigenous heritage. We see evidence of this in modern day Mexico, where there's persistent conflict. But if you look in the Lakota people and the tribe, and I've personally talked with them, there's still some conflict in terms of land rights and everything. So indigenous peoples without their free, prior, and informed consent, states cannot relocate them. They have rights now. This was not the case, but now it has been the case. But even after that, and this is an important comment and submission drafted by Amnesty International in 2018. Um, so, so this is recognized, and the land that indigenous peoples live on is home to over 80% of our planet's biodiversity and rich in natural resources such as oil, gas, timber, and minerals. So because they're so this is where the where there's a contradiction, because while there's biodiversity, but then at the same time you have these resources that our companies and governments are after. So that's why they're naturally just routinely appropriated, sold, or leased without even consulting the indigenous people. So they're, as I said, they're uprooted against what they want, and discriminatory policies are placed. So activism is needed against human rights abuses related to land rights and culture. There's a case study that you can look at in Peru, multiple case studies, and then in Kenya, and how the Senway people were never consulted, nor was their free and informed consent ever obtained prior to their eviction. And this is in actually as recent as 2018. So it's still continuing. This is in the Embobut forest, and they here's an account. 35-year-old David, Sandweger man who was shot during a forced eviction. They told me not to scream or they would kill me. Um, so this is how forced evictions are taking place. Um, and so the home is no longer safe, and the Sandweger people have been living in their ancestral land for generations. And of course, the Kenya Forest Service guards just come in, tasked by the government, of course, and so they manage the forest, and they shot and killed Robert, a Sandweger man, and seriously injured David. So this is unacceptable. I mean, human rights need to be respected of indigenous people in the same way that they're respected in the general population. And so even the population is increasing, all of this needs to be done in a more systematic manner. Human lives are at risk, and the project is suspended, or is at risk of being suspended. Um, but they want the government to allow the people back. The Sandwegger people are saying that that's where they were born, and so the forest is theirs. And here's some pictures of the forest. Um, and so families have been torn apart here. Um, so 7 million people who campaigned for a world where human rights, are something important. Are talking about um, this specific situation. Anyway, so these are the types of, and we can talk about case after case where indigenous rights are not respected. So I wanted to end with um, the human rights um, sustainable development goal agenda. So for 2030, and how this was applied. This is a bit dated. It's from 2017. But leaving no one behind. I'm just going to quickly go over this. Leaving no one behind. Human rights, equality. So 92% are closely linked to human rights. At 92% of the 169 targets in the social in the Sustainable Development Goals are about human rights. So that's why 73 out of the 169 targets had substantial links to the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Participation and accountability. Um, So, as a update to the Millennium Development Goals, actually the Sustainable Development Goals, two of those make explicit reference to indigenous peoples, committing double agricultural output of indigenous small-scale farmers and to ensure equal access to education for indigenous children. There is also a strong commitment in the 2030 agenda to empower and engage indigenous peoples in implementing and in reviewing progress and achieving the goals. So this sums it up. We need to do more. We have good data, but we need more disaggregated data, looking into land rights, looking into improving poverty and hunger, social security, healthcare, education, but most importantly, and this is something I'm going to emphasize, again and again. When we're talking about the rights of indigenous people, we have to understand environmental sustainability. I've lectured a lot about environmental sustainability, but looking at it in one place is important. Reviewing Sustainable Development Goal, the target in SDG Goal 12, and the target in 13, 14, 15, 16, so 12 through 16. Those are all looking at environmental sustainability. And when you save the environment, you save the people that are closely connected, the livelihoods of the people that are closely connected to the environment and to the land. And that's the bottom line. Increased awareness on lifestyles in harmony with nature, reduction of waste generation, sustainable tourism, climate change adaptation, conservation and sustainable ocean use, sustainable ecosystems and forest management, and sustainable water management. And so that's pretty much the summary of everything that is important in this report. You can go over other parts of this, and thank you for listening.